nightmares in my head, I fear that the thoughts build up until I can't hear, that my mind fills up into a creature, and it haunts me somewhere much deeper.
Hello and welcome to True Crime Rocket Science, the most authentic voice in true crime.
Hi guys, from a very cold South Africa. It is definitely one of the coldest days of the year. Welcome to 22 shocking new insights. And I hope you've got your notebooks ready, because what we want to do is check our knowledge, see how much we knew about this case. The legal question we're asking is, Timmy, I really need to type here. Terry, Dean, good to see you here. I wonder if we're going to see Stephanie. The legal question we've got to ask here is what happened to Titanic an accident, or was an accident waiting to happen? That's kind of the legal question that we want to assess. But first, we want to be curious, right? And we want to have the sort of scout mindset and gather some information before we prognosticate on that answer. So let's see where this takes us. By the way, if you don't know, this is Timmy. Timmy is my partner in investigations. When we're on the road, he becomes Monsieur Holmes. So yeah, that's you. So what we're going to do in this live stream is we're going to deal with the as I say, the legal question. There you can see Bruce Ismay testifying at the Senate inquiry. There definitely is a true crime aspect to it. Their witnesses, their witness statements. There's the issue of safety. Was safety taken seriously? A lot of the same issues that you had going into the Titan expedition. But then there's another aspect, another part of the narrative that I also want to look at, which is the ship designer. In a weird way, I guess you could compare him to Stockton Rush, the guy who, what's the word? It was his creativity, it was his design, it was his innovative mind, it was his engineering that essentially went into Titanic. So to what extent does he bear responsibility? So we're going to look a little bit beyond the story of Titanic, very briefly into his backstory, and then we're going to deal with those 22 insights. You may remember him from the movie as the following character. That's him over there. Let's just do it like that. And the reason I'm putting this picture here is you see him not just as a man, you see him as a husband, as a father, as a family man, right? And so what kind of person was he with regard to his involvement in the Titanic? Was he a sociopath? Was he kind? Was he a good guy? Was he ruthless? Was he ambitious? What was kind of going on with him? You may remember him in the movie as this character. Not quite sure why. As that character, right? And if you watch the movie, do you remember how that character was conveyed? Did he seem to you to be a cold, calculating fellow? Did he seem to be a kind-hearted, sensitive person? And whatever your answer is, the question is, well, what was he in reality? Who was this guy, the designer? Who was he in reality? Okay, so good to see you guys here. I'm just going to get going with my little thing here. Just put it back on myself. And so what I'm going to do is take you through a couple of snippets, and that's going to introduce us to the topic of this particular designer. Okay, so let's start with the first one. The impression you get from that, I'm not sure if you caught all of that, but the impression you get is the guy on the other ship basically feels like he's not important enough to make this, to insist on his communication. He's sort of saying, I'm warning you about an iceberg, but the impression he's getting is, obviously Titanic knows about it. They've got far more important things to worry about because they've got far more important people on board, and Titanic have that attitude as well. And so they do butt out, right? But can you see how you can easily have an issue like that being lost in the noise, right? Does that make sense? Real Deal says, I never understood how you can tell what they're saying. Well, I've never understood how you can play the piano with no names on the keys, but I've got a keyboard in my office where the letters on the keys are mostly gone, or half of them are gone, but yet I can type because I know where the keys are. Something you learn with experience, I guess. Erin says, did that really happen? It does seem so. It does seem so. So just communication. If they just had the communication protocols sorted, then that could have saved lives, right? Juju says, yes, it did. Okay. I think we're ready to deal with the 22 things. Are you guys ready? What do you guys say? Have you guys got your notebooks ready? Have you guys got your notebooks ready? I've got mine. Have you got your notebooks, everyone? Ready? We're going to go through them fairly quickly. We are at about the 1 hour mark, so let's get cracking. I'm going to put this on screen while we go through, because I think some of you are thinking that these aren't based on history or aren't based on facts. Okay, so let's go through them. Number one, I will be putting them in chat, so don't worry if you miss them in the beginning. Number one of 22, new evidence suggests a fire in the ship's hull caused the ship's demise. Anybody who already knew that? Holly says, I'm in the dark without a notebook. Well, you must either order one or you must, I don't know, get a piece of paper. Okay. So what you're reading there isn't an old wives' tale. It's not a conspiracy theory. It's real. That before Titanic even sailed off, there was a fire burning in its hull. And that fire had been burning for several days, right? So you've literally got a ship that calls itself Titanic. Remember what the designer said. Let's build a hull that is a double hull. So now you've got a single hull ship, and it's got a coal fire burning in it, and they can't extinguish it. Bear in mind they've got mountains and piles of coal. It's a steamship, and some of this coal has caught alight, and they can't put it out. And so they end up sailing on this maiden voyage with the ship literally on fire, right? So AK Cruz says, I did know that. So you can put a tick there that you knew that. If you didn't know that, you can put a cross. I didn't know that. Somebody says, I heard it was bad rivets. Kerrigan says, yes, I heard that. Kath says, I knew that via a recent documentary. And so even if you know that, the question is this the reason why Titanic sank? Did Titanic sink because there was a fire on board? What do you guys think is the answer to that? What's the logical answer to that? Pharaoh says defective steel. You can imagine that if there's a fire on board, even if the steel isn't defective, it's going to make the steel defective. Okay, number 2. I think I'm going to put this image on screen. Okay, number 2. Hold on, before I get to that. So this is the article dealing with that. Shall we go through it quickly? So this is just to prove that what we're talking about is historical. Stokers agree the blaze was in progress from the time of leaving Southampton till 2 p.m. Saturday. And here's the article. Every stoker who was interviewed declared that the Titanic was afire from the time she left Southampton until Saturday afternoon at 2 o'clock. This story was first told by an officer of the ship who requested that his name be withheld, saying that all the men had been warned not to talk about the disaster. So already you're starting to get a sense of a true crime element here, that somebody knew something was wrong, that they were told not to say anything about it, and so you kind of already have a cover-up going on. We are all sailing on schedule to New York on the maiden voyage. Don't let a fire interrupt all the pomp and ceremony. The fire was in the coal bunkers forward, said this man, in stokeholes 9 and 10, on the forward end in what is known as the second and third sections. So the fire must have been raging long before she pulled out of her pier in Southampton, for the bunker was a raging hell when 1 hour past the Needles, the fire was discovered. Immediately we began to work on the fire, and it took us until Saturday afternoon to extinguish it. We were compelled to dig out all the coal from these sections. In my opinion, this fire played no small part in the disaster. Now, if you guys have been paying attention to my other episodes, one of the arguments I made was that Titanic should have rammed the iceberg head on, right? Now, whether there was a fire or not, but let's argue for the sake of argument that there was a fire, and it looks like there was a fire. That's another reason why the Titanic should have hit the iceberg head on, because the front section of the hull, the bow, was reinforced. It was the best part of the hull to take the brunt of the impact. And here's another reason why the side of the hull, I don't know if it's called the aft, but the side of the, what do they call it? What side of the hull was struck by the iceberg? I saw it somewhere. But anyway, the Titanic wasn't designed to be struck from the side. It was designed to be struck from the front. And so if Titanic had believed in itself and struck the iceberg head on, then that area that was so perhaps vulnerable because of this fire wouldn't have been exposed in the same way. Starboard, that's what I'm looking for. I think a counter argument to the one I'm making is that had the Titanic literally cut through the iceberg and the iceberg had gone like that, you could literally have had it being damaged anyway. But I don't think that would have happened. I think the Titanic would have hit the iceberg and basically got its nose almost stuck into it. It would have almost been like a head-on collision of a car into a wall. I don't think it would have carved right through it. Now, what's really interesting with the sketch over here, thanks for that, Eddie. What's really interesting with the sketch is it shows over there how the iceberg kind of had two peaks, twin peaks, and that the Titanic managed to miss both of them, right? Managed to miss both peaks and actually seemed to lift out of the water as it sort of rode over part of the submerged iceberg, right? I'm saying it should have aimed for square between those peaks, right? The other thing that's interesting here is in the sketch, these sketches were drawn by someone who was there. You see other icebergs in the area. And also, once the ship sinks, you still see icebergs floating around the area. And that's why this is drawn by someone who was apparently there, who apparently saw what is going on. And you see the icebergs around the ship throughout the sinking. And so the question then arises, if they were in visual range, why couldn't you go to them and use them as lifeboats? Does that make sense? Okay, so let's go on to the next thing. Are you guys learning anything? So just a last thing about the coal fire. According to the documentary Titanic, The New Evidence, a fire aboard the ship prior to its departure burned at 1,800 degrees Fahrenheit. It wasn't just like a little bit of a smoldering fire. It was burning like the sun. And apparently it burned 3 weeks prior to the ship's departure. I don't know whether I believe that, but that is one of the things that's been mentioned, that this fire was actually burning for 3 weeks. Now, my own personal feeling is, if you say it's because of the fire that Titanic sank, I would say, well, the Titanic didn't sink until it hit an iceberg. Did the fire cause the Titanic to sink? Now, I would say the iceberg did, because the fire was out at the time that. Did the fire increase the chances of Titanic sinking? Probably yes. Probably yes. Okay. So if you knew about the fire, did you know that it burned for 3 weeks? So that's one way we can challenge your knowledge of this case. Let's see if what you guys say. Okay, number 2. Did you know this? A lifeboat drill was scheduled for that day, the day of the crash, April 14th, 1912. And the captain cancelled it. Captain said, no, we're not going to have a drill. It reminds me a little bit of the Russ incident where Alec Baldwin was scheduled to have safety training. And I don't think either he did some of it or he didn't complete it. I think there was also safety training scheduled, or a safety presentation scheduled for that day or something like that. But anyway, it's quite interesting. Lady Cat said, yes, I knew that about the lifeboat. So I guess you've got maybe 2 out of 2 already. Okay. One more thing to mention about the fire. A former honorary secretary of the British Titanic Society said, a fire may have accelerated this, but in my view, the Titanic would have sunk anyway. And I tend to agree with that position. In other words, people who are saying it wasn't an iceberg that sank Titanic, it was a fire, I don't agree with that. I think it's you've got to look at the iceberg at the end of the day. Thanks a lot, Mitchell. Thank you. Yeah, no, absolutely. Why the F did he cancel that? Okay, so that's number 2. Then this one, and this one's I just found this quite interesting. Have you ever seen Titanic's last lunch menu? Have you seen Titanic's last lunch menu? Well, here it is. Let's put it on like that. April 14th, 1912. Fillets of brill, egg a la Argenteuil, chicken a la Maryland, corned beef, vegetables, dumplings from the grill, grilled mutton chops, mashed, fried, and baked jacket potatoes, custard pudding, apple meringue, pastry, buffet, salmon mayonnaise, potted shrimps, Norwegian anchovies, sauced herrings, or is it soused, plain and smoked sardines, roast beef, round of spiced beef, veal and ham pie, Virginia and Cumberland ham, bologna sausage from Italy, galantine of chicken, corn ox tongue, lettuce, beetroot, tomatoes, cheese, Cheshire, Stilton, Gorgonzola, Edam, I guess from the Netherlands, Camembert, Roquefort, St. Ivel, cheddar, ice draft, Munich lager beer, blah, 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 right? So once again, just when you read through that, you get a sense of how luxurious the Titanic was and how spoiled the passengers were, and also what their little what their little desires were. You know, I'll have a fillet of brill with Roquefort cheese, and I don't want any of that. And can you give me some of that? And that is what led to all of these telegrams being sent. Part of that was the fussiness of all of these passengers, right? And okay, so how many of you knew about this menu? How many of you have seen this menu before? Yeah, it is something of a feast, right? Definitely worth sharing. Terry says, what a spread. Okay, so that's number 3. Let's go on to number 4. By the way, this menu sold for tens of thousands of dollars. On September 30th, 2015, a private collector bought Titanic's last first-class menu. That's also important to say, is that this is the first-class menu. Obviously, folks on third class didn't get this sort of treatment. But this sold for $88,000. A collector paid $18,000 more than the initial maximum price. Okay, number 4. Number 4 also has to do with Color the Fab says, now I'm hungry. Someone says they didn't know about this. Where's that person? Andy says they paid very well. Okay, anyway, so the next thing is, did you know that the Last Supper had an 11-course meal? We unfortunately don't have a copy of that menu. Chelsea says, I want to know what they served. Probably crackers and tea, something like that. Momo says, I knew about the menu from another YouTuber. Okay, let's take it up another notch. Did you know about this? Oh, by the way, the 11-course menu, the dinner meal, the Last Supper, consisted of hors d'oeuvres like oysters. It also had filet mignon and desserts like chocolate and vanilla eclairs. And the reason I'm mentioning this, you might say, I don't know why you're bringing up silly details like that. Well, this is what the passengers had eaten before going to sleep or before settling down with a good book. In other words, they were used to being in the lap of luxury. They just had a sumptuous meal. Maybe they'd eaten more than they should have. Maybe they went into a deeper sleep than they otherwise would have. Maybe they were full. Maybe they were bloated. Maybe they were just feeling maybe they had a lot to drink as well. And so these were the passengers that were now dealt a life and death situation. And the answer is yes, they didn't deal with it very well. Everybody didn't deal with it very well, right? So that's the reason why you want to bring up what they ate. It gives you just a little bit of an insight into what it felt like to be a passenger on board. And now you dealt with a life and death situation where you're going to need to act bravely, act decisively, and put yourself in harm's way. You know, you're going to have to deal with this situation or die. Okay, so now this is number 5. Let's keep the ball rolling. There were only 2 bathtubs available for all third-class passengers. So maybe that's where you were when the Titanic struck the iceberg. You were trying to have a bath. You're waiting your turn for a bath. That's another good point. They probably dined very late, like they finished dinner very late that night. I mean, to get through an 11-course meal, it's going to take a while, right? Okay. Did you know that? Did you know that there were only two bathtubs available for all third-class passengers? Okay, I want to see someone here that knew that. I want to see someone here that knew that fact. If you knew that, then you certainly deserve a badge. Oh, Lady Cat knew that. Wow. Okay. Lady Cat, we're going to see if we can get you 22 out of 22. Kerrigan says, I didn't know that. Chelsea says, I knew it, but I think you knew it from Patreon, didn't you? Okay, next one. Okay, so in terms of the two bathtubs, 706 third-class passengers on the Titanic who paid between £3 and £8 to make the crossing only had two bathtubs. So two bathtubs for 706 third-class passengers. In other words, it's 353 passengers per bathtub in third class. Let's just put that down. 353 passengers per bathtub. That gives you a real sense of how different things were on the first class decks compared to the third class decks. Now, I'm pretty sure that there were enough toilets. Okay, so let's continue. We're now going to number 6, and appropriately enough, let me first ask you guys, how many iceberg warnings do you think Titanic got? Let's do a quick quiz. How many iceberg warnings do you think Titanic got? How many iceberg warnings do you think was sent to Titanic? Chelsea says 6. 6 seems like a bit much. Betty Smith says 5. Asa says several. How many do you think there were? Was there 1? Were there 2? Were there 3, 4, 5, 6? How many? Juju says 4. Lady Cat says 3. Lady Cat, there were 6 iceberg warnings. So Lady Cat, there's definitely one factor that you didn't know. Okay, so evidently the most critical iceberg warning never made it to Captain Edward Smith because of the lack of the prefix MSG, meaning Master Service Graham, right? So although you have that dramatization in A Night to Remember, what we know technically is that because the operator on the other ship made a bit of a, what's the word? He made a stupid mistake. He didn't add the prefix MSG. Well, the operator didn't treat it as a very important message. Did you guys know that? So it's a protocol thing that, so if you compare this to the Rust incident, you could say this is comparable to the armorer in the Rust situation, in the sense that this was a protocol that wasn't followed. Was there a protocol in the Rust case that the armorer didn't follow? Question mark. Chelsea said, I knew that. Okay. Okay, so this acronym would have required the captain to personally acknowledge the receipt of the message. Because it did not have the MSG prefix, the senior radio operator did not think the message was important. So just those 3 letters, if the operator put MSG, and it doesn't stand for message, it stands for Master's Service Graham, right? MSG, Master Service Graham. If just those 3 letters had been put on a piece of paper, 1,500 people's lives could have been saved. That's pretty shocking. Do you guys agree when I say that? Do you agree if I say if they'd done that, put MSG, that 1,500 people could have survived? Do you think I'm exaggerating? Do you think it's possible but unlikely? Or do you think that is exactly what you're talking about? If someone put MSG and the operator saw it, nothing would have happened. 3 letters, MSG, no ship sinking, no worst maritime disaster in history. Just if you put 3 letters there, MSG, right? Just that. And where have you ever heard that conversation? You can almost imagine the operator like, should I put MSG? No, I don't have time. Dong, dong, dong. And the guy doesn't look at it. That cost someone 1,500 lives. Imagine you lose your life because someone didn't type M. Let me do it right now. Because someone didn't do that, you died. And then no one talks about that either. No one acknowledges that. Okay, let me ask you guys, how long elapsed? What is the length of time? I'm doing this instead of saying, oh, I knew that, let's see if you know that before I say it. This is number 7. How long did it take after Titanic saw the iceberg to Titanic hitting the iceberg? Let's see if you know the answer to that one. See what you guys say. No. How not when did it sink? How long to when they saw the iceberg until when they hit the iceberg? Zooflute says 15 minutes. Kimchi says 10 minutes. Someone says 20 minutes. Terry says, I'm waiting for Lady Cat. People say minutes. Well, here's the answer. Sorry, guys, most of you are wrong. 37 seconds. So again, I've been saying they should not have tried to get out the way. If they didn't get out the way, they didn't have enough time to get out the way anyway. But if they didn't get out the way, if they didn't even see the iceberg, this is one of the most incredible things on this story. If they didn't even see the iceberg and they hit it head on, probably Titanic wouldn't have sank and probably everyone would have survived. How's that? If they didn't, they didn't know this iceberg was right in front of them, but if they didn't know it until they actually hit it, probably Titanic would have survived and it would have been, wow, it is unsinkable. It would have limped into New York and people would have said, unsinkable Titanic arrives in New York, all passengers safe and sound. Well done, Titanic. You're a good and safe ship, the way I made you, right? Juju says, holy cow, I didn't know that. Number 8, when was the first lifeboat released? So it took 37 seconds. How long did it take to release the first lifeboat? And here's a clue. We've just spoken about the dinner that they had, that they probably had a really, really long dinner and enjoyed the dinner and had drinks. And now it's like, hey guys, hurry up. We've hit an iceberg. By the way, the ship's designer, I think, was sleeping when they hit the iceberg. It's actually quite interesting. This other survivor was saying he fell asleep. He didn't even know that he hit an iceberg. And then someone woke him up. And then I think he went to sleep again after that. There's one survivor that we mentioned right at the beginning. How long do you think it took after they hit the iceberg till the time the first lifeboat was dropped into the sea? Chelsea says 1 hour. Wolfie says 40 minutes. Audrey says 45 minutes. Mina says 5 minutes. Kimchi says an hour. Erin says an hour and 20 minutes. How long do you think it should have taken? Like, all things being equal, how long should it have taken? Well, ideally, you'd say, if you know that there are not enough lifeboats on board, then you would really want to get the first one absolutely filled up and drop it down as soon as possible, and then put down the next one. Because, do you remember the ship designer said the ship's going to go down in about an hour? So don't you have less than an hour to release the first boat? Anyway, here's the answer. Number 8, the first lifeboat was released an hour after the iceberg struck. So in theory, if what the ship designer said had come true, only one lifeboat would have been dropped down and everyone would have died other than the passengers on the first lifeboat. So I'm just saying, if Titanic had been, how can I put it? The ship's design, I don't know if you remember, he said, this boat's going to go down within an hour, or an hour and a half. It took them an hour just to lower the first lifeboat. If his prediction had come true, you easily would have had 2,000, 2,500 people dying, right? And so I had a really interesting thought prior to when I was putting together the research here, and the thought was, people should have been told that there aren't enough lifeboats. And if you watch the movie Titanic, you may remember the whole thing. We don't want to create a panic, and everyone's saying, "Oh, we don't want to create a panic." I think there should have been a panic. I think if people panicked more of those lifeboats would have been filled. The lifeboats would have been dropped faster. So this whole thing of we don't want to create a panic, was that the right psychology? Given that, anyway, we're going to deal with that aspect now. In other words, speed would have saved lives, and people were taking too long, and we know why, because they were cold outdoors, they were uncomfortable outdoors, and they were used to being comfortable. But what if you could have said to them, this is going to be, this situation you're in right now is going to make history as the deadliest disaster in maritime history in terms of ocean liners and cruise liners. It is the deadliest up until right now, 1912. It's going to be the deadliest for the next 100 years as well. Maybe you need to get a bit of a move on. Maybe you need to forget how much money you have and how comfortable you are, and that you're on this luxury ship, and get your ass moving, get going. If you could tell them that, more people would have not died, right? What does Lady Cat say? Yeah, that's a very good point. That is an excellent point. Good to have you with us, Lady Cat. Okay. Number 9. I hope you guys are making notes. Number 9. How many people do you think went into that first lifeboat that took an hour to lower, to get into position? So you might say, did they wait until they could fill that lifeboat? That's why it took so long. So the capacity of a lifeboat is 60. How many people do you think they got into that first lifeboat? What do you guys say? No, I'm not blaming the passengers. I'm trying to imagine a way that lives could be saved. We'll blame someone at the end of all this. But certainly, women and children first. That's right. Deborah says 12. Brittany says 10. Tracy says 12. And off. Oh, almost. Let's pull this out. Lady Cat says 30. That's a pretty good guess from Lady Cat. Guys, you need to pay attention to Lady Cat. She knows what's going on. Head and Shoulders says 20, 15, 10, half. That's a good guess. Okay, so here's the answer. only 28 boarded the first lifeboat. It had space to carry 65 people. Now, if you think about it, you've already just, bear in mind that there are only 20 ships. The designers wanted there to be 48. There are only 20, less than half the ships needed. The very first ship, the very first boat that you've released into the sea, has already cost the lives of 37 people. Just in that their first response has cost the lives just like that. Without a doubt, there's no argument here. 37 people lost their lives already because of releasing that first boat not at capacity. And again, you kind of got to ask, why didn't the designer go and deal with the situation and say, guys, get everyone on board? Well, he probably didn't anticipate the situation. He probably only realized later on, well, look, I see quite a few boats down there. None of them are full. And so by the time he realized that, again, also this happened at night. Some people were still trying to wake up in terms of dealing with a disaster. Wolfie says, I resent Lady Cat for knowing everything. Lady Cat, you had a very good guess there. How are you guys doing? We're about to get to the 10th insight. Who is the wealthiest man aboard? Anyone know who the wealthiest person was on board? And at this point, if you've got 9 or 10 out of 10, you're doing well. Is there anyone who knows the answer here? Anyone who are at about 9 or 10 out of 10? Paddy, you're right. Well done. Raoul, you're right. Well done. Well done, Nathan. Okay, so that's the answer. John Jacob Astor the fourth. He was the wealthiest. Okay, and so the next question is, did the wealthiest guy on Titanic survive? Did the wealthiest guy on Titanic survive? And by the way, he was worth $2 billion today, right? He was the heir of the Astor family fortune. He was by far the richest person on the ship. He was worth approximately $85 million at the time, and he would have been worth $2 billion today. So basically a billionaire. Did the wealthiest person on the ship survive? I see there are a couple of yeses. Wolfie says his wife did. Audra says yes. The answer is no. And that is why it's so shocking that, for example, that first lifeboat that went into the water, there was place for 20 or 37 people. There's place for 37 people on that boat. Astor could have been one of them. Now, can you imagine you are a king of the world, like literally you've got so much money. You are, I'm not quite sure how old he was. Let's see if I can get that information. Anyone know how old he was? John Jacob Astor. But you kind of got this whole fairy tale life. He was how old? Maybe in his 40s. 47 years old. So there he is. So can you imagine you have billions or millions, you're in your 40s and you don't have to die. But for whatever reason, people took their time getting into a boat, and it's women and children first, and so you don't get your spot. That's the other thing. It's women and children first. So you're kind of thinking, okay, let's get all the women and children on, but let's get all of them on so that the men can have a chance to live. But because they don't fill all the boats, And you can imagine some women don't want to leave their husbands, or they don't want to get onto the boat, or they want to get onto a boat, but later you have a situation where, well, people lose their lives. Now, can you imagine you've made a fortune, or you have a fortune, and you are on this boat and you're powerless. You've got all of this going for you, but it doesn't mean anything in that situation. Wolfie, thanks a lot for that. Thanks so much. Okay. I find that just so tragic, that, it's one thing to, in another way, you could imagine that this really rich guy would make promises and bargain his way onto a life raft, like you see happening in Titanic, and yet he doesn't. He dies. 47 years old, multimillionaire, even billionaire, and he dies with the Titanic. And then you say he could have not died if someone wrote MSG, or if someone didn't see the iceberg and rammed right into it. He could have not died. Okay, so that's number 10. Are any of you at 10 out of 10 so far? They're about to get a lot harder. Here we go. How long did the Titanic take to sink? So remember, I was saying that the ship's engineer said that it'll likely take an hour to sink. Also, that it took an hour to drop down the first lifeboat. How long did it take the Titanic to sink? Helena says, no matter how rich or poor, denial was a fact. That's a really good point, is that people were in denial. This ship's not going to sink. Right? So there's the answer. It took 1 hour, 40 minutes to sink. If you said, sorry, it took 2 hours, 40 minutes to sink. If you said 2.5 hours, you're wrong. We want the exact time here. So that's right. That's not right. Chelsea, you've got to, that's not right. It's got to be exactly 2 hours, 40. If you say 2.5 hours, you can't give yourself credit for that. Okay. Right. Now on to the next one. Which was the ship that was nearby when the Titanic sank? Which, Lady Luck? Let's hear it. Sorry, Lady Cat. Which ship was nearby the Titanic when it sank? The nearest ship to it. What is the nearest ship to Titanic when it sank? Was it the Carpathian? I'm pretty sure it starts with a C. Was it the Carpathia? Do you guys reckon it was the Carpathia? Carpathia. There are quite a few of you saying Carpathia. Lisa says it was, someone says it was the Mayflower. Some say Carpathia. Someone here says, was it the Lusitania? Thanks a lot, Mina. And there's the answer, the SS Californian. And so, to me, this is the big story. Like, if you know Titanic forwards and backwards, inside out, this is the big story. Because Californian was right there. They were so close that when they sent telegrams between them, the operators' ears hurt. That's how close they were to each other. And the Californian literally sent a message to Titanic, right, saying, dudes, there's a big iceberg right in front of you. And Titanic basically said, bud out. We're busy. We know what's going on. Leave us alone. And that's not the end of the story. Is if Californian were right there, why didn't they go and help them? Right? So Californian were much closer to Titanic than the Carpathia. So again, like you could also once again say, well, even if Titanic did hit the iceberg, even if the lifeboat thing was a fuck up, and it was, well, they still could have saved hundreds of lives because there was a ship right there, right? And so why didn't that happen? Yeah, exactly. Why didn't it happen? And by the way, there were people, I don't know if you know this, we're going to get to it in a moment. There were people in the water, like Rose and Jax in the water, that Carpathia took out the water. In other words, people that survived a long time in the water from being cold, right? They weren't in lifeboats, they were in the water. So, in other words, you had a situation where it wasn't just lifeboats that could save people. Any boat in that area could save somebody. And that's why I was saying people could have used the icebergs in that area because it was like a lifeboat in the area, just like less than a mile away. The Californian was another one that if it had simply just listened to its telegrams or sent telegrams that were answered, then, or sent them in the right way, everyone's lives could have been saved. That's also a good point, is that the time that this happened was when a lot of people were sleeping. So obviously, if Titanic struck this iceberg at almost any other time, early in the night, late in the morning, you would have had a totally different outcome. The time that this happened was the worst possible time. Paige says, I'm going to start to answer what Raoul does so that I can just get one right. Okay. Okay, so let's deal with this. So the SS Californian, I'm going to put that on screen right now. There it is. Let's do it like this. That's the ship, right? Not a terribly impressive looking ship. But that ship was right around the corner. You can see it's got a couple of lifeboats itself. There are a couple of lifeboats on it. But it wasn't a small boat. It wasn't like a speedboat or a tugboat. It was quite a big ship just around the corner. Tracy Lee says, California is woke and Titanic was right wing. Okay, so this ship was a British Leyland Line ship. You can imagine if it was a Star Line ship, then there might have been a different outcome. She's the only ship that saw Titanic and her rockets during the sinking, right? And that is what is dramatized. Do you guys remember in the movie Titanic, them shooting off rockets? Do you remember that? Well, the Californian actually saw those rockets going off. And again, because of Titanic's attitude, because of the types of telegrams being sent, because of the whole pomp around the ship, the Californian thought that it was part of a party. So Titanic is sending emergency flares into the air, and you literally have a situation where the ship nearby thinks, oh, they're having a party. And it's again the inability to understand safety protocol, right? So someone is sending an SOS, forget about by sound. Now there's a visual SMS being sent off, and someone else sees it. I see the flare, there it is. Oh, I think they're having a party. Wow, it's Titanic having a nice big party on board. No, it's not a party. And so even though these rockets are seen, California says, I guess they know what they're doing. We're not gonna. We don't need to assist. That was a mistake. That cost 1,500 lives. That's a good point. Were the flares the wrong color? I think something else that was mentioned was that someone was also signaling with a green signal, and that was the right color. but they didn't see that signal. Anyway, so that's the 12th point. Let's go into a bit more detail about the Californian. So again, you might say, I don't know why you're covering this ship nonsense. You're a true crime channel. Why are you being so self-indulgent? Why are you covering maritime history? It's got nothing to do. There was no court case. There's no legal aspect to it, one a bit. So the United States Senate inquiry and the British Wreck Commissioner's inquiry, so there were two, both of them concluded that the Californian could have saved many or all of the lives that were lost. Let me repeat that. You had two inquiries, one an American-based inquiry, same thing that's happening in the Titan right now, and a British inquiry, same thing that's happening in the Titan right now. And what they ascertained was that this ship, the Californian, could literally have saved everybody. And in other words, whatever the mistakes Titanic made, there was someone in the area that could have saved everybody's lives. And they should have, and they could have. Why not? Right? And you wouldn't have had that come out if someone didn't investigate, if someone didn't say, this seems, something happened here that doesn't seem right. Why did so many people die here? Did somebody make a mistake? No. Just hubris. No, shit happens. No, people did make mistakes. People aggravated an already bad fuck up. Sorry for the words, but people aggravated that by making additional fuck ups, right? And you're only going to find that if you're curious and you say, let's investigate what happened here. Tracy says, I'm staying past my bedtime for this. But just imagine that. The Californian saw the flare. I mean, it's so freaking ridiculous. The Californian sees the rocket going up and sends a message to Titanic and says, hey, are you guys okay? And hopefully puts the words MSG there. And Titanic says, no, we're not okay, we're sinking. And Californian says, okay, well, we're 4 miles away. Fasten your seatbelts, we're on the way. It's simple as that. Guys, we see your rockets going up. Are you okay? No, we're not okay. And then you say, why didn't they do that? Because the Titanic operator said, bud out, because the sound was so loud in his ear. And so the guy said, well, I guess they know what they're doing. I guess they're having a fun time. Wrong color flares, yeah. But there was nothing to stop. Bear in mind, those flares were going off past midnight, 1 o'clock in the morning. There's nothing to stop a conscientious operator from going, you guys do know there's an iceberg, you know, and are you guys having a party? Do you guys know what's going on? No, we are in trouble. There's nothing to prevent that. Okay. The U.S. Senate inquiry was particularly critical of Stanley Lord. So if you want to blame someone, if you're saying, you know, someone was to blame, I think heads need to roll about this. What about the captain of the California? Well, now we've got a name. The captain of the California was Stanley Lord, this dude. And now you might say, if we come back to what you were saying about the designer, Thomas Andrews, right? Should he have felt guilty? Should he have felt remorse? And if you say maybe he should have, well, what about this guy, Stanley Lord? He was the captain of the other ship that could have saved all of these people. He was the captain. He was responsible for his ship, right? How did he feel about things that happened? And so that's really interesting. Is he was told by the U.S. Senate inquiry that his inaction was reprehensible, right? That was what the U.S. Senate inquiry found. Your inaction that night, you were right there for hours while people were dying. You were sleeping while people were dying. It's reprehensible, right? despite this criticism, there were no formal charges. So you might say, wasn't this guy guilty of something? Shouldn't he have been fined or his captaincy taken away? Shouldn't he have been stripped of that? Shouldn't he have been blamed, right? But the fact is, although they found his conduct reprehensible, it seems like they couldn't find any criminal liability. He went to sleep. Was it really his fault, right? Um, and so no formal charges were brought either against him or his crew. You could also say, surely the telegraph operator should have kept trying or should have listened or something. And so Stanley Lord disputed the findings, and he'd spend the rest of his life trying to clear his name. So on the one hand, you might say, jeepers, I really think, that ship was right there. Couldn't they even see the Titanic was sinking? Couldn't they even literally see that it didn't look right in the water, kind of thing? Couldn't they tell that these rockets are going on way past party time, right? They've stopped, the Californian has stopped because there's an iceberg. Isn't there some part where you're going to go, couldn't the weirdness that's going on with Titanic, they've been sending all of these fun messages that stopped. Has something happened, right? And so this guy would go on to dispute the findings against him, and he wants to clear his name. And so you kind of got to ask the question, it's a little bit like Alec Baldwin in the Rust incident. Is he truly innocent and is making these defenses because he's got a case? You can't blame me. Or is he, I guess, in denial? Or is he protested too much because whatever? What is the real situation here? Does he have a leg to stand on, in the sense of, was he right to not do anything, right? And so I just find it interesting that he does spend the rest of his life trying to defend himself. And that's when we come to, okay, well, let's look at the guy we're dealing with. Was this kind of guy like the ship's designer? Was he sympathetic? Was he sensitive? Was he perceptive? Was he the sort of character who cared about his fellow man, right? And so this is what we find out. The Californian was later sunk on 9 November 1915. So just 3 years later, this ship that didn't come to the aid of the Titanic was actually sunk by German submarines in the Eastern Mediterranean during World War I. So that was the fate of this ship. This ship that saw the Titanic go down went down itself barely 3 years later. It was hit by submarines. Okay. Are you guys okay if I just pause on this subject matter just for another 5 minutes? I just want to complete the sketch of the Californian, and in particular its captain. So this is literally what happened. Throughout the night, no one on board the Californian tried to wake their wireless operator. So if the captain slept through the night, that's the other issue, is that the wireless operator was also sleeping. And so you would literally have the crew on the Californian aware of things around them. I'm talking about, for example, the guys in a crow's nest would be aware that, wow, I can see there's an iceberg over there, and there's an iceberg over there, and oh, there goes up another firework from Titanic. They must be having a good party. And I've just seen another iceberg over there. Oh, there goes up another firework from Titanic. Is it a firework? Could it be a flare? There goes another flare into the sky, right? And now it's late at night, maybe it's 1 o'clock in the morning. And so they are wondering, I wonder what's going on. But they don't wake up the operator. If they did wake up the operator, everything could have been different as well. All the operator needed to do is wake up and listen to the message, and you would have seen there was a message from Titanic saying, we need help. Literally, Titanic was messaging saying, we've hit an iceberg, we need help. But now the operator of the Californian's asleep. So the wireless operator slept until 5:30 a.m. And so, as I say, these crew members could have simply said, dude, do you want to find out why they're firing rockets? Anyway, Titanic went down at 2:20 a.m. So the operator slept for 3 hours. So let's just look at the following. Alf says, so much I didn't know. And that's why I wanted to share it with you, because there was also a lot that I didn't know. So this is the important thing. Just think about this. The operator sleeps until 5:30 a.m., right? Titanic goes down at 2:20 a.m., right? So the people that are fighting for their lives in general start that fight from 2:20 a.m. onwards. I'm talking about the people who cling to Titanic until the last moment and they aren't on the lifeboats. They start fighting for their lives from 2:20 a.m. onwards. They say that in water that cold, the human body can maybe survive for about an hour, right? I swam in water of about 9 degrees Celsius, maybe 11 degrees Celsius. And after an hour, I was starting to lose consciousness, right? I almost died myself in a sea swim off Cape Town. So I would say pushing past an hour is really pushing it. But yeah, I guess it's possible. So in other words, someone could probably have survived from 2:20 to 3:20 a.m. just by moving in the water. And we're going to deal with a particular individual that survived 2 hours paddling in the water. In other words, someone was able to stay alive till about 4:30 in the morning, while the operator woke up an hour after that. In other words, if the operator had just woken up earlier, he could have maybe saved 50 people. The people who were, can you imagine what a death that must be? Trying to stay afloat, but it's so cold that you're struggling to stay afloat. All you want to do is stay afloat for as long as possible, but it's cold and someone is going to be sleeping for a long time. And the Carpathia is going to take 2 or 3 hours to arrive, 4 hours to arrive. Basically, it's going to arrive just after the last person has succumbed, in terms of the water. So the timing of this is also really tragic. Another thought I had was, couldn't they keep the Titanic sailing, even though it was, in other words, sail it towards the Carpathia, even though it's sort of sinking? One would have to calculate that, but I don't know if that would bring about a different outcome. Or would that hasten its sinking? So when Titanic had slipped below the water, the sudden disappearance of lights was interpreted by the Californian crew to mean they had just steamed away. So that was another thing. If the crew of the Californian hadn't been complete idiots, they would have said, wow, 1 minute they're having a party and they're not going anywhere, we're not going anywhere, they're not going anywhere. They are there, we are here. And then the next thing, all the lights are gone. And so instead of, again, let's find out what's going on, they just assumed that the ship had just sailed away. Another mistake. It tends to make you quite angry, doesn't it? So here's another issue. In 1985, when the remains of the Titanic were found, they realized that the SOS position given after the iceberg collision was wrong by 13 miles. So that was another error compounding everything, was the operator on Titanic gave the wrong coordinates for where they were. 13 miles. Then at both of the inquiries in 1912, there was conflict about the true position of the ship when it sank. The conclusions of the inquiries discounted evidence of uncertainty about the position of Titanic. So this is a really interesting legal thing is anyone basically being accused of not doing something could say, yeah, well, we got the wrong information. In other words, we couldn't save Titanic because we were given the wrong information. And then that turned out to be a bit of a cover-up, that turned out to be overemphasized. That was exaggerated. In other words, the position of Titanic as a defense, in other words, the position Titanic gave itself being inaccurate, was regarded as a not a valid defense, as I understand it. Okay. Some assume that the position which Lord had given for his ship was incorrect. In other words, the position that Captain Stanley Lord of the Californian, that the position he gave during the inquiry, that was incorrect because he was actually much closer to the Titanic than he claimed to be. And this is where you've got a probable criminal case where you literally have them investigating the Californian, investigating the captain, and the captain said, you know what, I was actually quite far away. I wasn't as close as you think I was. Well, they were close enough for the crew to see the fireworks or the flares. They were close enough that they could see the lights of the Titanic, right? They can actually see the little lights. And they were so close that the operator's ears hurt when messages were sent between ships. And now the captain, who spent his life trying to clear his name, was saying, no, we were really far away. We're actually too far to actually come to the aid anyway. Maybe not. Maybe it doesn't look that way. And so you sort of wonder whether the folks on the Californian didn't have a kind of a grudging resentment of Titanic, not only the way Titanic were treating their communications, but also Titanic being full of kind of fat cats and rich pigs kind of thing. So we're not going to help them, or we're not interested in what's going on with them. You know, that attitude, that arrogance may also have played a role. You know, instead of being sympathetic and being, you know, aware that there are also people in third class, maybe they're in trouble. Maybe they need our help. And maybe they thought, maybe they do need our help, but they are a bunch of rich assholes. Let them help themselves if they are in trouble. Was that part of the thing? So there's a book, The Other Side of Night, the Carpathia, the Californian, and the Night Titanic Was Lost. That's a book by Daniel Allen Butler. It was published in 2009. I'll get to that in a second. So it's The Other Side of Night, the Carpathia, the California, and the Night Titanic Was Lost. He makes the case that Lord's personality and temperament, which is a little bit of in the area of true crime, that his behavior at both inquiries, he made threats towards his crew. There's frequent changing of his story, so he changed his statement. The absence of the scrap log. He made strange remarks in Boston in a newspaper interview. He was saying all of this points to a kind of mental illness, that he had a lack of compassion. I don't know if I agree with this, but the author was accusing him of being sociopathic, or his attitude being compatible with sociopathy. He apparently never once expressed grief at the loss of the Titanic or sorrow for those who'd lost people. In other words, he would defend himself. He'd defend himself and he'd show what the facts were, but he would never really apologize or just say, wow, I really feel bad for the people who died. Okay. Now, number 13. And this is where it really gets, I don't know if you know the story, this is where it gets really, really tragic for me. Did you know that there was someone who treaded water for 2 hours and then he was rescued? He was saved. So if you take that whole thing, that Titanic sank at 2:20 a.m., someone treaded water for 2 hours until the Carpathia got there and he was saved. So it was possible. It was possible to tread water for 2 hours. Can you imagine what it was like for those who treaded water for an hour and then died, or treaded water for an hour and a half and then died? You're trying to stay alive. You're so cold, and what makes it all worse is there's a ship right there. And I think part of the reason this particular person didn't die was, I think he gave the whiskey in his system credit. I think he believed the whiskey is keeping me alive. And it's actually the opposite. Alcohol doesn't help you stay alive other than it maybe gives you a false sense of security. I don't think the alcohol would have helped him at all. I could be wrong. So this dude, Charles Joshin, treaded water for 2 hours. He said that a lot of whiskey kept his body warm in the sub. That was I think, what do they call it when you take a placebo? I think it's almost like a placebo effect. He believed that the alcohol would save him, and that's why he had faith that he would be saved, and that's why he was saved. I agree with that, yeah. So in terms of the other passengers, if they just believed that they would be saved, they may have been saved. If they'd made, if someone had told them, swim for that iceberg and we might make it, just that little bit of hope may have saved quite a few people. So there you have it. Even misplaced faith may have saved lives. Just, instead of giving up. Someone says alcohol raises your blood pressure. Okay. So did you guys know that? Did you know that there was a baker who treaded water for 2 hours before being rescued? Have you noted that in your notebook? Now on to number 14. 20 horses were needed to transport the main anchor. Now, in my analysis, in some of my other videos, I was saying, if they just drop the anchor, and obviously this is a hindsight scenario. There's not really any, I don't know if there's any good reason for Titanic to drop the anchor, other than if you say the ship moving helped flood its compartments. I suppose you could say that. But if they had dropped the anchor, they would have been very close immediately. In those 37 seconds when they were approaching the iceberg, would there have been enough time to drop the anchor, to have the anchor start to drop? I don't know how the mechanism worked on Titanic, but I'm just saying that 37 seconds before they hit the iceberg, and then also, even if they had hit it, the sooner they deployed that anchor, the sooner the Titanic would have stopped, and the sooner they could have made use of this whole thing of climbing onto the iceberg, right? If you look at that picture there, the iceberg looks almost the same height and size as the ship itself. Looks like kind of a mountain. Well, how much space would there have been to get onto this iceberg, especially if the iceberg was right next to the Titanic, right? That's simply my argument. Is it far-fetched? It definitely is far-fetched. But the point is the anchor didn't need to hit the bottom. It was so heavy, if they just deployed the anchor, it would have, I think, had a drag effect on Titanic, and would have stopped the ship a lot earlier. Do I have I think I've got a picture of that anchor somewhere here. I don't have it there. Is it the next one? I've got it somewhere. I just can't quite find it now. Maybe if I open this, just want to show you a picture of the anchor. Okay, well, I've got this. This is a picture of the horses pulling the anchor. Let's do it like that. There you get an idea of the scale of this anchor. It's several times bigger than a person. It looks like it's the length of 2 or 3 horses. I'm just saying if they deployed that anchor, they would have ended up very close to that iceberg and they could have gotten onto the iceberg. That's simply the argument. That's the point that I've just made, is that big heavy anchor would have had a drag effect. It doesn't have to hit the bottom because it is gigantic. Even if, bear in mind, it doesn't have to instantly stop the Titanic. Even if it saves 1/10 of a mile, it is that distance that people don't have to swim. And I then made another video showing, it's a guy that I actually interviewed for GQ magazine. He swam 0.6 miles. He swam 0.6 miles in a Speedo, and he survived in the Arctic, much colder conditions than were there, and then did the same in the Antarctic, also 0.6 miles. So I'm trying to get the Titanic and the iceberg closer together to make that a foreseeable argument. If you want to make the argument that there's no way the anchor could have done anything, well, we do have the story about the chef who paddled water for 2 hours. So I'm just saying that putting all of this together, you could have actually had some of the passengers save themselves if they'd simply thought out of the box and not been desperate to be rescued by an outsider, an outside influence. Okay, so let's. So by the way, the ship's anchor weighed 16 tons. That's 30,000 pounds. 16 tons. Pretty heavy. As you can see in the picture, 20 horses were required to transport the anchor just 2 miles to the town of Netherton, to the train station in Dudley in 1911. Did you guys know this? The ship took 2 years to build, took 26 months to build. They used 3 million rivets to build the 26,000-ton hull, and the ship cost 7 million to construct. Anyway, let's go on to number 15. Number 15. Yeah, that's 100% right. Did you know that 2 workers died while building the ship? Lady Cat, did you know that? Chelsea says, I knew that actually. Okay, and so one was a 15-year-old, one was Samuel Joseph Scott. He fell from a ladder and he fractured his skull. And then there was James Dobbins. He was squashed by timber that fell while they were, well, this is after the Titanic was built. So after the construction was finished, in the process of transporting the finished ship to the shipyard, he was squashed by timber. So that's really unfortunate. He died right at the end of that whole process. I'm sure none of you know this, and I didn't know this either. Did you know that the ship burned 825 tons of coal per day? Now, another thought I had was, isn't one way to have Titanic sink slower is have everybody throw the everything that you can find on board, throw it overboard, chairs, furniture, whatever, because that's weighing the Titanic down, right? And probably if you did that, maybe you could have bought yourself 5 minutes or 10 minutes. I don't think it would have made much of a difference. But there's 825 tons burnt of coal per day. Imagine if you could get rid of a lot of that coal, right? Imagine, would that have made a difference? I don't know. Letting go of the anchor, would that have made a difference? Probably not, unless you could have removed the chain to the anchor. Okay, let's go on to the next one. By the way, the total weight of Titanic was 46,000 tons. I don't know if you know this, but the iceberg was supposed to be, some people estimated it at 75 million tons. So that's, yeah. It burned 825 tons of coals a day in 159 furnaces that heated 29 boilers. Did you guys know that of those 4 chimneys, one didn't work, one was just for show? Did you guys know that? Okay, so now we go on to the iceberg. Let's go back to the sketch. Just doing a quick calculation. Okay. Okay. How high would you say this iceberg that sank the Titanic? I mean, I think they should call the iceberg Titanic and the Titanic something else, because the iceberg was this unsinkable thing. Something that weighed 45,000 tons hit the iceberg and the iceberg didn't sink. I got a lot of really strange arguments on my video where they said, you can't put people on the iceberg will topple over. It's the ship that toppled over. The iceberg was the Titanic here. The iceberg was unsinkable. And so even though this massive ship of 45,000 tons hits this iceberg, the iceberg's fine. The iceberg survives. The iceberg continues floating. So how much, what do you think the height was of this iceberg? Some have suggested that it was 400 foot long. Some have suggested that it weighed 75 million tons, which is pretty huge. Obviously, a lot of that below the surface. But how much do you think was sticking out above the surface? Well, that's the right answer. I hope you didn't Google it. That is the right answer. It stuck out 100 feet above the water, or 30 meters. So that is quite a substantial distance above the water. And if you think about it, that is a damn big iceberg to see at the last minute. It's not like it was a little flaky little thing, 30 meters sticking out the water, and they only saw it 37 seconds before they struck it. That's pretty embarrassing in and of itself. You do sort of wonder, wow, did they not have binoculars or telescopes, or what was going on? Sorry, Chelsea, sorry about that. Okay, so they say the entire iceberg was between 200 and 400 feet long, and the top of the iceberg was about 100 feet out of the water. Okay. I doubt whether any of you are going to know this. Tell me, I'm going to need your help here. Do you think there were any other creatures on board besides people? So I don't know if you guys watched the movie Titanic. Do you see any other animals on the ship besides people? Holly Golightly says, I watched the documentary. Yes, there were dogs on board. Okay. And so this is quite a sad one to be sharing with you guys. How many? So 1,500 people died. How many dogs do you think were on board and how many dogs died? Do you think any dogs survived? There were dogs, yes. Well done. 2 dogs lived. Well done. Jay says you're making me want to watch this movie. Yeah, so that is really incredible. And this is fact number 18. There were 2 dogs rescued from the ship. There were 7 on board. And I must say, I really appreciate that at least not all the dogs on board died, that some of them did make it. Two made it. Let's see if I can. I think this might be a picture of one of them. Just trying to see where it is. This may be a picture of one of the dogs. Timmy. So you can imagine that small dogs would have had a fairly good chance to survive. I don't know if people took big dogs along, but who knows? But I mean, even on that first boat, if they couldn't fill that boat, they only got 28 people in a boat with 37. Someone who was being really conscious could have said, hey, we've got some space, so let's put these dogs on the boat. Maybe someone would have said, I don't want dogs on the boat with me, but who knows? Okay, so now on to there were 9 dogs on board, 2 survived, so there were 7 that died. There were 9. One was a Pomeranian and the other was a Pekingese. That's the correct fact. Sorry about that. Okay, now on to the next one. This is where it gets really quite troubling, given everything that we know. How many people in third class, that area that only had 1 bath for 325 or so people, how many people survived, like percentage-wise, survived in third class? And you can imagine exactly how it was dramatized in Titanic is probably how it did play out, was they didn't allow the people in third class out until everyone had been sorted out in first class. Whereas if they had, they could have filled more boats. They were, I think, more thinking about who's more important and women and children first. And let's sort out the first class passengers first and then the rabble, right? But I think they should have allowed everyone to panic and everyone to get into those damn boats, right? That's right, 25%, less than 25%. That's number 19. Thanks a lot, Alf. Thanks a lot for that. Okay, we're coming to the end. We've got 3 left. How many of the crew were female? How many of the ship's crew were female? Remember, the approach was women and children first. So how many of the ship's crew were female? Or was it a male-only crew? What do you guys say? One more time. How many of the ship's crew, here's a picture of the ship's crew. How many of the ship's crew were female? No female crew, 0. well, you can percentage or numbers, doesn't matter. Terry says 25. Holly Golali says 2. Chelsea says 3 or 6, I can't remember. Okay, the answer is there were 23. 23 were female. How many of those do you think survived? Only 3 did not survive. I don't know why, but I find that a little bit surprising that the 3 female crew members didn't survive. I find that quite surprising. So yeah, these are the facts. There were 908 crew on board. 23 were female. Only 3 did not survive. In other words, 20 female crew members did survive. Of the 885 male crew members, a tragic 693 went down with the ship. So I find that really sad, is if you were unfortunate enough to be on the ship, pretty much, and a male crew member, you were pretty much guaranteed to not make it, because you were making it your duty to save everybody else. In other words, you could be a crew member on any other ship and that's fine. But if you're a crew member on Titanic, that is your bad luck. Wolfie says, damn it, I'm not going to make it to half right if I don't get one more. Okay, well, let's see if we can get one more. How long did it take to find the ship's ruins? It's a fairly easy one. How long did it take to find Titanic? Was the band counted as crew? Really good question. I would guess yes. Right, so there's the answer. It took 7 decades, more than 7 decades, to find Titanic. You know, the one thing you can say is Titanic sank, that it was this incredible tragedy. They couldn't even find this massive ship for more than 70 years. That is also pretty incredible. It's this massive ship, and they literally couldn't find it for 7 decades. Okay. And now the last one. And I'm pretty sure no one is going to get this one right. I think this one's almost impossible. How many ships do you think could have been built with a revenue? So let me say that again. How many Titanic ships could have been built with the revenue made by the movie Titanic? The question is how many? How many Titanic ships could have been built with the Titanic film revenue? Wow, so someone's actually watching the movie on TV. Erin says 11. Kimchi says 10. Azza says 10. Songbird says 10. The answer is 11. Nearly 11 brand new Titanic ships. So with $2.2 billion, excuse me, with $2.2 billion, they could have built nearly 11 Titanic ships. If you wrote 10, it's the wrong answer. Okay, so we've now reached 22. Let's see how many, add up your scores, and let's see how many of you got 22 out of 22. This was designed for you not to get much more than about 18, even if you're an expert. If you've gotten more than 18 or 19, that is really impressive. If you've gotten half, that's really not bad. What do you guys say? What score did you guys get? Let's have a look, see if I can bring it up. I hope you guys have waited to do this. So I'm really pleased to see 34% got 4 or less right, because the object of this exercise was a learning experience, was to be curious and to learn something. I learned something researching this. I was really excited by it. I really thought it was fascinating. And I thought you guys would stand to learn something as well. So it's good to see a third of you really learned a lot. 32% say, I knew about half of this. 20%, that's quite a lot. 1/5 of you say that I knew about 18 of these insights, but there was some worthwhile. I don't know how many voted just out of cynicism, but looks like some say they knew all 22. If you went to this website, it's from USA Today. It has Shadow says I got 13. Holly says I learned so much. I'm glad that you enjoyed it. Mel says I didn't get close to half. Patricia says let's do it again. But anyway, there are 57 facts on this website by USA Today. I got some of my information from there, but there's definitely a lot of information on that particular website. So check that out. Pleasure. It's a pleasure. I'm just trying to see if there's something else I wanted to share with you regarding this. I think it's this video. I'm not 100% sure if I'm on the right thing. Is it this one?
To others. For there were actually cases where women absolutely refused to be put in a boat.
So I don't know if you heard that, where he said there were women who refused to be put into a boat. You can imagine how that just held everything up. You know, this is a life and death situation. Well, I refuse to get into the boat. And now there are people that are waiting for all the women and children to board, men, and the women who won't board, and so boats get dropped down incomplete, right? I think that happened quite a lot. So one of the insights, I guess, that I got out of this whole thing was kind of two things. The one was people should have been told that there are not enough lifeboats. People should have been allowed to sort of panic, so that, in other words, tell people that there are not enough lifeboats and get people into those lifeboats. And so one of the problems that night was complacency and a lack of panic, complacency and lack of urgency. And not only on Titanic, but also on the Californian, when they were all sleeping, right? The crew was seeing things and just shrugging their shoulders. So a lot of complacency. The other thing is, what did I write here? The biggest disaster in history, and one of the problems was that they didn't panic. In other words, fear could have helped them. And so what is the problem? They were in denial. And as one of my patrons said, that it was such a brilliant insight, is, would it have been so bad if Titanic limped into New York with its bow crushed, dented, but nobody did? Well, they could have said Titanic survives impact with giant iceberg, but it would have survived it. And so everything we learned about the fire that undermined its hull was designed for a head-on collision. And by trying to avoid this huge iceberg, it ended up in a situation it wasn't designed for. So in a way, a lot of the Titanic was a lot of bad luck piled onto bad luck. If just one thing changed here or there, so many people could have not died. If someone had written MSG, if they had designed the hull with a double hull, if they had instead of 20 boats, 48 boats, if they had just simply put enough people into the boats, if the operator on the Californian had just not went to sleep when he did go to sleep, if all of these different things. Yeah, exactly, the butterfly effect. So I think I'm going to play out now. It's 8 o'clock in the morning here in South Africa. I think the sun is coming up. I think it's time for you guys to grab a pillow. I'm going to play out with some images from Titanic. And what I want you to think about is the tragic legacy of the designer, the designer Thomas Andrews, who had a wife, who had a child, who wanted Titanic to have a double hull, who wanted 48 boats, lifeboats, who wanted, what is the third thing that he also asked for? Double hull lifeboats. What is the third thing? I can't remember what the third thing was. Double hull lifeboats. Wasn't there a third thing? Real Deal says, I can't wait to see more OceanGate videos. I will be bringing some more out. Sally says fire. Someone says binoculars. What was the third safety thing that he thought of? So the one was a double hull. The other one was 48 lifeboats. What was the other one? Oh, that's right. That's 100% right. Yeah. A taller bulkhead. That's absolutely right. Well done. Okay, so I'm going to play out. And so what I want you to remember is he was someone who knew better. And because they disregarded him, he also died on his own ship. The ship that he designed, he died on himself. And I think that was really, really tragic. And the end of the story is that I heard that he wasn't last seen in the smoking room, that he apparently did try to save himself, but he just wasn't able to save himself. So that's the counter myth to him being in the smoking room and being sort of wistful about the end of his life. He actually did try and survive, and he didn't. So that's probably, that was part of the shock. Yeah, he probably realized what was going to happen, and probably in a moment he realized the future. Okay, I just want to thank the mods that were here. Thanks to all my members and also to my subscribers. Good to see all of you. Also good to see some new faces. Thanks, guys, for keeping it civil and decent. I really appreciate it. I hope you guys have enjoyed the new intro music. Thanks a lot to Brad Hardy for that. He's also just completely out of his own. I never even asked for it. He made a second intro, which I played in my last video. Thanks very much for that. And also thanks a lot for all the super chats. Yeah, that's a thick bulkhead. And also for you guys participating. I think you'll agree that it was a worthwhile thing to do. And now you will have pretty much expert knowledge on Titanic just based on watching this video, because there's a lot in this that even people who've studied this for a really long length of time wouldn't have known themselves. So you've just become, I won't say experts on Titanic, but very knowledgeable, let's put it that way. And so you can tell people, and when you have conversations going forward, that just the letters MSG could have changed the outcome, that there was a ship called the Californian that could have changed the outcome, that the ship's designer, and they just listened to him, could have changed the outcome. And that it isn't just about hubris, it's about just paying attention to what's going on around you can prevent us collectively from going into disaster. Just paying attention, by being curious, by not assuming that we know everything, right? That by ramming into the Titanic, which is what the Titanic was designed for, ramming into the iceberg, that could conceivably, I can't prove it, but it could conceivably have saved everybody. And so it's important to keep the scout mindset. By the way, I'm not trying to promote my own book. This is a book by Julia Galef, The Scout Mindset. I really recommend it. The scout mindset, that could have been, if that was, if that attitude, that psychology had been used, if that had been the psychology of the people on board, they'd been curious about what was going on instead of resistant, instead of a soldier mindset, what could happen here? More people could have saved their lives as well. Sally says they'll be stacking up over the centuries. Thanks very much. Thanks very much, guys. Thanks for being here, Erica, as well. Thanks a lot for all the super chats. I hope you guys have a great week, and I hope you enjoy the ending to this live as well, just with the music and the pictures that I've chosen. Okay, so that's it from me. Have a good week going forward. Timmy says goodbye. Timmy. Okay, thanks, guys. See you guys next time.